Welcome to Young Asia Television.
Hello and welcome to the interview. I'm speaking today with somebody who's no stranger actually to the media, Gomin Dayasiri, a senior lawyer. You've appeared on Young Asia Television 2 or 3 times in the recent past as well, but this is perhaps the first lengthy discussion we'll have in English. So thank you for coming on to the program.
Thank you for inviting me.
I suppose any good a place as any to start off, Mr. Dayasri, is the fallout out of Geneva. Topical subject, everybody's talking about it, not many know about actually what went into that process and what is the result now that the resolution has been passed. You've written though, in the Sunday Observer, when you were asked that question amongst a number of others, you mentioned, well, the question was how can the resolution be defeated at a time when it was still being discussed, but your answer is interesting. You say, inter alia, the LLRC recommendation, the solution to the international growing scrutiny is that the LLRC's recommendations have to be accepted locally and internationally and should be implemented soon without succumbing to international pressure. In light of what you said then, what has changed, if anything, once the resolution has passed, and do you still believe that the LLRC's recommendations will be implemented by the government?
Let's face it, the government held out to the international players that they were having a truth commission by the name of the LLRC. And as a result, it was decided that everybody awaits the LLRC commission report.
Sure.
And the position of the government is, we ourselves will attend to the matter on release of the LLRC report. Now the report is out. And what is very the remarkable factor is that no longer does one talk about the Darusman report. That has gone overboard. I mean, in the sense that it's been replaced by the LLRC report. If you remember, before the LLRC report, everybody, the international players, were all referring to the Darusman report and implementing those recommendations. That went completely astray with the LLRC report. So there is a tremendous achievement for the Sri Lankan government because what they held out was that it was going to be whitewashed. But once the report was out, that was not, they changed their mind. They said there are shortfalls, but notwithstanding those infirmities, adopt and carry out the LLRC report. So in that sense, I do not think the government can ever go back on the LLRC report, because if they do so, it's a question of credibility. Now, if you look at the LLRC report, as you know, a commission report need not be fully implemented. It is in Sri Lanka, the sovereignty is with the people, and it is the people who must decide. So yeah, if there is no referendum, the next thing is the people's representatives. So I think what the government should do is, you have the LLRC reports, take what is necessary for the purpose of enhancing the position of the country. Pick those recommendations, give priority of it, work it according to your clock, and implement it early. But of course, I must tell you, those recommendations cannot be implemented in a year or two, because those are long-standing matters. But the thing is, there must be a takeoff. Having done that, they should do it according to our own stopwatch.
Here's the rub, Mr. Dayasri, and I'm sure you know, this came out, what, November last year? No Sinhala translation publicly available, no Tamil translation publicly available at all. It was in fact the Centre for Policy Alternatives that released an unofficial version of Chapter 9 of the recommendation so that the Sinhala-speaking public could get to know what's in the report, whether they agree with it or not. The government seems to be fairly confused. We have our Foreign Minister at a press briefing saying that there's going to be a piecemeal approach to its implementation of the recommendations. We then have, shortly thereafter, another minister of the government saying that those were the private opinion of the Foreign Minister. We then have the Foreign Minister again expressing in Parliament the opinion that there is going to be some recommendations implemented. So even just post-Geneva, we see a complete incoherence with regards to the government's positioning, with regards to its implementation. So where does your wellspring of belief and certitude spring from given the kind of confusion that we see from government itself regarding its own recommendations, which, as you said, they can't go back on.
They cannot, in sense, the question of credibility is there. So that the report must be taken from that point onwards. But in taking it, well, the government's latest position, I believe, which I heard yesterday in Parliament, is that official position, which I think Mr. Sachin Vajkunawardene expressed, is that they will continue with the LLRC report. Now, in continue with the report, it is necessary that you pick up the priorities, and then you must effect it to suit our conditions. Because remember, this is our recommendations of a group of people who are eminent, and what is remarkable is that they have been critical of the government on very, very relevant matters like good governance. And they have been critical of a government minister. Now that is very, in the sense, it is something you can clearly say, these are not servile sycophants. They have been independent, and that is a credit to the country. So that when they do give recommendations, one must look at it in a positive way. And then there are the questions, what are the needs of the country? Now, there are several
but that's not answering my question. My question was, where do you find the belief that they will implement given the confusion?
What I think I answered it by saying the expressions made by Mr. Sachin Vajkunawardene
in his official capacity. All right, Mr. Dayasri,
because if Dr. Pires has been making several statements.
Apparently in his private capacity. We don't really know.
In private capacity, or in whatever, to put it mildly, I mean, one has to consider that he was one of those who cheered the CFA on one hand, and he's taken quite a different stand thereafter. Politicians, you know, without mentioning Dr. Pires himself, are people who change their positions, and politicians, when they go places, have to change positions.
Sure.
So let us now have this particular statement made in Parliament during a course of debate on the subject. I think that is relevant, and I think I answered that question in that way.
Mr. Dayasri, with regards to the interim recommendations made by the LLRC quite a while ago, where can one read them today? Do you know?
Well, there was supposed to be an inter-parliamentary committee, inter-ministerial committee, and as you know, that's one of the drawbacks. Those recommendations have not been fully implemented.
The interim,
so that is a question that can be raised. What did you do with the interim recommendations? That's a matter I myself have raised, because that affects the question of bona fides. But the question is, the Sri Lankan government, we have done. I'm not representing the government, but I'm now talking as a Sri Lankan for Sri Lanka. The position is a very substantial amount of work has been done. Let us take the child soldiers. The UN themselves have made a critical assessment of the LTT. They have all been sent back to their parents. And nearly 90% of the LTT cadres have been rehabilitated and absorbed into civil society. The mines have been cleared. Then once again, a large number of people who were without homeless have been relocated in the areas, I don't know whether in their own homes, but relocated in the places. And also, if you look at electricity, power was not there. Then there is schools and health facilities have been developed. So you see quite a few things have been done, but the problem is these things have not been properly marketed. We have to admit that the LLRC report has been bold, courageous enough to point out deficiencies, so that one cannot say that it is a commission that was appointed to whitewash the government. And that probably is the very reason that Darusman has been rejected by the international community, and as you know, a homegrown solution is the best possible answer, and we have picked on that.
And I want to come back to that homegrown, because actually you've written quite a bit on that. But I also want to just go back down memory lane. On the 22nd to 23rd of February 2006, you were part of the government delegation to the peace talks.
Yes,
one of the last, actually.
Well, I was there in the last three. I think I'm the only one who represented all three.
The LTT representatives, Pulidevan and the crowd. What was it like at the time? Of course, one couldn't foresee how it all would end, but perhaps from a personal perspective.
Yes, I remember before that we had a training session. I mean, even they brought I think somebody from a Harvard team to teach us as to how we should
the negotiation process.
Right, and I can remember Dr. G.L. Pires then was in the UNP, and Mr. Austin Fernando.
Different configuration altogether.
But they came and gave us their wisdom on their association, and they told us that we will be met with a very powerful debating team. So we were newcomers. We were not in this game before with the LTT, and there was certainly a certain amount of reservation as how we would do. But I'll tell you something, this is what shocked me. They were not even fit to be a school debating team. It was a lot of hype and psych. And that is what we saw. They were blown out of proportions. I mean, they have mystified those who went. They were in fact very poor performers, except for Balasingham, who was really a legend on his own, in his own right, because he hardly associated with the rest of Delhi. He was behaving there, which is foreign wife, like a square from England. I mean, he was associating us more than the LTT. He was more comfortable because the culture was totally different. I found it a person who was more assertive, Tamil children. I think I really have my reservations as to whether the LTT team themselves got along well with Balasingham.
With one
because
another.
he was for himself. He was I mean, he was trying to be a legend in that organization. So it was not surprising. I came back and in fact told the government that there's a lot of hype and psych. That's the exact route. So I said, look, if you take them on in battle, don't be surprised if they fall like a pack of cards.
I want to talk about an article he wrote, well, now close upon 2 years ago, on the 16th of February in the Daily Mirror. And it was titled Tamil Grievances Untouched and Unattended, long before any of the drama of today. I don't know even whether you recall writing what you did, but I read it in the morning, reread it in the morning. And you note, and I quote, the government has failed to attend to the legitimate grievances of the Tamils, and you go on to say that photographs of Prabhakaran will appear on the Kajan walls of the backwoods of the peninsula. You gave a very strong warning then, 2 years ago, and I go on to note, this was just after the TNA's victory in the polls, and you make a very strong case in your own way for the dignity, and I quote again, and comfort for the Tamils. I want to spend some time on this because you speak of Sinhala nationalism as the answer to addressing Tamil grievances. And Kalana Selanratna, responding to that column of yours, wrote something in return, and he didn't take you apart, but what he said was that Sinhala nationalism has failed to address Sinhala problems. So if you were a Tamil with legitimate grievances, how would you see Sinhala nationalism as any answer to addressing what are outstanding Tamil grievances?
I think he's got that point wrong, but I think he said something else also. He said that what right do I have to identify Tamil grievances? Now,
well, that's not what he said. He said
that also. I remember.
He wanted to know what you thought of Tamil grievances. He didn't question your right.
I think he did, because I also read that.
Okay.
Anyway, I'll answer both your questions.
Yeah.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I still stand. I reiterate, because you have to distinguish the Tamil people and the terrorist. And clearly the Tamil grievances have nothing to do with the devolution of power. Devolution of power is something that the Tamil politicians want. Because what Sri Lanka should cater is for the Tamil people. And those grievances, unfortunately, have been identified, some of it, in the LTT report. Now, those were not grievances in the LLRC report. Sorry, not the LLRC report. Yeah. Now, what is interesting is, how did I come to discover those findings? No, those are not my discoveries. If you remember, there was something called an experts committee. And in that committee, there was a group of people. I was in the subcommittee led by Mrs. Naganathan, Nirmala Naganathan, who identified, there were Tamils, there were Muslims, there were Sinhalese. We identified what were the Tamil grievances. If you remember the expert committee report, I belonged to a group that was with the minority group. But there was one area where we all agreed. That is on the identification of the grievances. Now, what I have set out there are those same grievances that was accepted by the committee comprehensively. Now, for saying that, I consider this as an honor, really, because I find, I won't mention the name, but a well-known ambassador writing to a Tamil website calling me a Sinhala racist. Then I see another website run by certain Sinhala people calling me a LTT man in sheep's clothing. So my position is that this problem cannot be solved by devolution of power. You have to attend to the grievances of the Tamil people. I mean, there are many, like, for example, the prime reason is language. And that answer would maybe, if that is properly implemented, trilingual program. Because you need Tamil and Sinhalese along with English.
Which is actually part of the interim recommendations.
Yeah, part of it. And I would say that Tamil and Sinhalese must be brought into the forefront, because it is by that today we see the character of Sri Lanka changing. You know, unlike in the days when I was your age, it was all people from big schools that came into the forefront. But today, if you look at the professions, the legal profession, the medical profession, if you look at the army, if you look at the private sector, you get many children from not from the elite homes, but from the average Sri Lankan homes.
In light of the President's New Year message, of course he didn't type it in, he didn't type in the SMS, but it went to 17 million SMS subscribers this year. And I found it very surprising that in light of also the report at the time which was then launched, in light of the interim recommendation, in light of all that you've said in your columns, the message was only in English and Sinhala and not Tamil. And also in light of, I think, what has never been officially retracted, the Tamil national anthem being made a joke of by certain government ministers. To quote you again, the dignity and comfort of the Tamil. If you were Tamil, how would you see all of those three put together?
Well, as far as the Commission report is concerned, I think the main problem today is to find good translators now in court or anywhere, whether it is Sinhalese or Tamil.
We found it without too much of bother. I would not imagine that the government could find it any harder.
No, there is a difficulty. I would say, I'm not thinking of the report. If I'm asked to the report, but you give a Tamil or a Sinhala translated, what might ultimately come out may not be the words of the Commission, but the expressions of the translator, because undoubtedly we don't have skilled people. There were today, to find skilled people, even to get an interpreter in court, is very difficult. So there is that practical problem, but that's not the answer to it. I mean, that is why we must improve get on with the trilingual program rapidly, because that will overcome. If you look at the statistics,
but my question was not so much the trilingualism. My question was your perception of a Tamil person and what he would or she would see as the insensitivity of government to say one thing, that they are dedicated to what you are saying that they should be, but on the other hand showing no demonstrable output in that regard.
Yes, but I think isn't it, if, for example, if the Reasonable Use of Tamil Act had been implemented properly, much of this would have been overcome. I mean, one has to blame the central government, because from 1958 that legislation was there. Why it is not been implemented is no other reason but because of this politicization. You are only serving your electorate. So this problem can only be overcome, in my belief, if we have national parties catering for all communities, being able to make inroads into the north and east. And that the best answer, I think, the Tamil people themselves are given. If you see previous elections before the last, predominantly 90% of the votes went, or between 80 to 90% went to the TNL. For the first time you find UNP and the PA coming very close, even difference I think about 5 or 6%.
Sure.
Now that shows clearly that Tamil people are moving towards a national government, and that towards national parties, and that is something that has helped the Muslims greatly. I find that the Muslims have joined the mainstream and they are getting MPs. So that, except for very few, now the kind of Tamils that may be in the government as members may be totally sycophants. But you need people assertive from their own party, because as long as the TNA is there, to me I find that they are sitting, what I may say in Sinhalese, the Goni Billa, the boogie, of showing,
translate that?
Well, that is kind of a monster, that shows the Sinhala people as monsters, because they can only thrive in a situation where there is no harmony. That is why it is very important that we do away with these ethnic parties. Both the UNP and SLP, and UNP had that character in the early days of after independence. If you have a situation where national parties can overtake, if they can get in,
and
that can only be solved. That's why I keep pressing. If you attend to the needs of the people, Tamil people, not the Tamil politicians. You're talking of 13th Amendment, something imposed by India. That is totally to do with the Tamil politicians. The whole purpose was to bring the LTT into the mainstream. But Mr. Dayasri,
I want to actually switch gears now, and then, because we're running out of time as well. Again, I think you've been publicly circumspect about the capacity of our Human Rights Commission to actually be a Human Rights Commission, and not just with the end of the war, but just in general with human rights violations in this country. Most recently, we have seen daylight abductions in front of courts. And I want to then peg that and anchor that to something that I read in the Rupavahini site in October 2011, where you had said Sri Lanka is today a stable country. I think you meant politically stable. But what, with regards also, given that you're a lawyer, with regards to the rule of law in Sri Lanka today, where people have been detained, they've gone to the Supreme Court only to be abducted thereafter, where people are being abducted in front of courts, where today it's the call of a brother-in-law who's in government to the president that seems to get you out of a white van, and that's factually reported in the media. So there are concerns, I think, about the rule of law.
Definitely. For example, I've been harping on this. If we have a very active, vibrant Human Rights Commission, this is something I've been which I say we don't have. I mean, that is the real advantage of the LLRC Commission. It has been accepted because when you read the report, no one can say it is a bunch of sycophants, but I would say that what is the track record not only of Human Rights Commission, what about the Commission of Bribery and Corruption? Now you have to get those things. I'm not saying for a moment that the 18th Amendment, remember from the time of independence, it is the head of state that has appointed the Public Service Commission and all these commissions, and there were no criticism. The mistake is the appointing authority must appoint people who can win the confidence of the public that they are doing a positive job of work.
But as a final question, since you also served at the COI, you were part of the Commission of Inquiry and the IIGP process as well, back in the day under this government. So you've been part of some of these, not politically.
I paid as independent lawyer.
Correct.
Not for the government or anybody.
Correct, but you were part of the process nevertheless.
I was a lawyer appearing for the Defence Forces, retained by them.
And the question I want to leave with is that you made witnesses cry. You made them break down.
I have made witnesses cry not only in that court but in many courts, because when witnesses are caught saying lies,
my question is this. When you are perceived to be somebody from the community that may project their grievances to that person, I'm not saying legitimately or not. As a person of that community, just as much you and I would see ourselves in our own community and see our best of us and the worst of us. How would you say to the people who look at you now, and the very forceful language you use, that one needs to look at Tamil grievances, one needs to implement LLRC, how would you say your own credibility is? And why should they believe you?
My credibility is something, if you take the instance of the commission, I was a lawyer, I had to cross-examine witnesses who probably were not speaking well. If they do cry in the witness box, I can be cautioned by the judge, which I was not if I was going outside my limit. But I have no control over the tears of a witness if a witness breaks down. Now, I'm a hard cross-examiner. I try to be yours. That's my profession. I'm carrying out my professional skills, but outside my profession, I can look at it as a member of society. And in that sense, I'm saying that the devolution, it's not the devolution process that is going to solve it. It is attending to the legitimate grievances of the Tamil people, and maybe there are Sinhala extremists who fault me, but I still stand that the Tamil people's grievances, those are grievances, I must say, majority of them the Sinhalese people have, the Muslim people have, the identical grievances. But you must remember the grievances of the Tamil people are more because they were under 30 years of terrorist rule. They did not enjoy the franchise, the right of dissent, the democratic rights. So they have suffered because the children, especially education, welfare, health. So they must be uplifted. I have no problem if that is given priority. But many of those problems are common to the Sinhalese and the Tamils. So I think it is the duty of the government, which I have been harping long before the LLRC and been called the Sinhala nationalists. That my belief is that the Sinhala nationalists also must take up this cause, because that is how we will show our goodwill. And to that extent, I must say, it is some of the Sinhalese, I was not associated with that, who first rushed goods to the north after the LTT disappeared, and it is not, the diaspora came in much later. So to that extent there is goodwill, and I would say that the Tamil people also must not keep asking and asking for more and more, because what is being given, I mean, they have the right to democratic right, but we are a poor country, we can't do things like they would do in the West, but the positive role must be played by the government. That is why I blame the government on Tamil grievances, and I stand by it at all times.
Mr. Dayasri, I think that's a good point as any to end our interview. Awfully short, but I think food for thought for continued debate and discussion online, where this will invariably be put up. Thanks for joining us on the program.
And you were a very good questioner.
Take that as a compliment.
I like that, because that kind of hard talk is useful, though it was not hard but pleasant, but I enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.